I wish to join in congratulating Senator Corker, Senator Isaacson, Senator Shelby, and others who've come together around this issue of better underwriting standards. It's hard for me to understand why this would be resisted in this bill, because as has been outlined both by Senator Corker and by Senator Isaacson, it really was underwriting that created the problems which led our nation to the brink of a fiscal collapse. The way I've described it is this. What we had was an inverted pyramid. You had this situation where an individual made a loan to another individual, or a corporation made a loan to an individual, based on the value of a piece of property. Unfortunately, when that loan was made, it was made in a way where nobody really looked at the value of the property relative to the loan, and nobody looked at whether or not the person who was getting the loan could pay it back, because the system no longer had strong underwriting standards. And then that loan was taken, and it was syndicated, it was securitized, it was synthesized, and it became multiplied, as the senator from Tennessee said, into $600 trillion of notional value. And we ended up with this huge pyramid of debt built on the basis of this loan down here at the bottom of it between this corporation and this individual. This loan which was based on value which wasn't there, and on ability to repay which wasn't there once the rates of the loan were reset. So why did this happen? Why was this loan so inappropriately made? Well, it was inappropriately made because we had a breakdown in underwriting standards. I've been through 3 of these events in my professional career. Once in the late 70s, once in the late 80s when I was involved in representing a bank in New Hampshire, once in the late 80s when I was governor of New Hampshire, and now. 3 major financial disruptions which were created almost entirely by a failure in underwriting standards, where people were making loans that couldn't be paid back based on asset value which wasn't there. It just was aggravated radically this time because of the way the system suddenly took these loans and exploded them through the securitization process and the syndication process. And so, if you're going to fix this problem, if you're going to put in place a regulatory reform system which actually fixes the issues which caused the crisis, you've got to address underwriting standards. And that's why the Corker Amendment is so critical, because this bill does not address underwriting standards in any other way, in any significant manner. And so if you're going to have a legitimate effort to try to make sure that this type of an event doesn't occur again, you've got to put in place underwriting standards which establishes rules of the road, which says that in the future, America will not allow this sort of proliferation of lending, which is unsecured or not properly secured. It's not unsecured, but not properly secured, and where the person getting the loan, we know, can't repay the obligation. Ironically, in this situation, these loans were made in some instances with the full understanding that this wouldn't happen, that they couldn't repay and that the value wasn't there. Why? Because we separated underwriting standards from the process of actually making the loan. The people making the loans were only interested in the fee. They weren't interested in whether the value was there of the security, or they weren't interested in whether the person getting the money from the loan, once the loan reset, could repay it. They were just interested in the fee. Well, this should stop. And the language which Senator Corker has put forward would accomplish that. It would put in place not unusual underwriting standards, not new underwriting standards. It would simply go back to essentially the standards, and they're not quite as strict, quite honestly, but the type of standards which we had at a prior time when we didn't have this type of risk in the marketplace, because people knew that when they borrowed money to buy a house, they were going to have to put money down, and if they didn't put the full amount of the value down, that they were going to have insurance to cover the difference. And they knew that their creditworthiness was going to be checked and thoroughly checked, and their ability to pay the loan was going to be checked. So it is a totally reasonable approach, and if you're going to do one thing in this bill to avoid a future event, such as we confronted in late 2008, where basically the entire financial industry of this country almost melted down, if you want to do one thing to avoid that type of event, you should adopt the Corker Amendment. And so I certainly hope this will be a bipartisan vote. I don't understand any opposition to it. I don't understand the concept which would oppose it, because It is basically good banking, good lending, and it's also good for the people who are borrowing the money, because they're not going to get money just arbitrarily, but only if they have the value in the asset they're borrowing on and if they have the ability to repay it. So I certainly hope this amendment will be approved.
Mr. President.